Hello, everyone. Welcome back for this new episode of Coding Design System. Today, I'm really happy to be with Stephanie Eckles as a guest for today. So, hey, Stephanie, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a real pleasure. I'm really glad that you accepted this invitation. So, welcome for this show. Welcome on this stream, and let's start with a quick presentation. You're a really influent person in the CSS and front end ecosystem because you're an author and contributor to a lot of different kind of structure and platforms like an online instructor at Haged, Twitch streamer, international conference speaker, but you're also behind a website named Modern CSS .dev. And would you like to present you to the rest of the audience so everyone could know you a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, hello, everyone. Um, again, thanks for inviting me. And thanks for joining us for this stream today. Yeah, you may have encountered modern CSS .dev. Um, according to my analytics, especially if you're looking to restyle form fields. Those are the most popular articles by far. Um, but I've been, let's see, we're coming up on the second birthday. I actually think we've just passed the second birthday in April for this particular project. Um, and you may have seen me, yeah, doing different conference talks. I just was able to do one recently beyond Tellerand. Which was really fun to travel for that one as well and do it outside of my computer screen. But yeah, I've just been kind of really enjoying teaching folks about CSS. I use the terms like leveling up or, upgrading your toolbox because my goal with teaching through modern CSS.dev and other forums is to truly help folks understand what's available in the language today and get them up to speed if they haven't looked at it for a while. So, everything I do, I really emphasize the practical angle. I love creative coding, but I found that there was a little bit more of a need to continue focusing on the practical angle and um, ensure that folks can use these techniques today because the browser support is sufficient and things like that. So
Yeah, I see. I completely understand that. And how did you fall into CSS and working with CSS? Because it's I don't know, it's some kind of a niche at some point, when you start in especially right now developing modern web apps and progressive web apps and so on. CSS is always, the small parent the poor parent that you have in the stack. So how did you fall in love with CSS at some point?
yeah, so in total, I've been working on the web for just around 15 years now and had quite the evolution in my own journey. I started with Flash, spent a significant amount of time working in marketing, my degrees in advertising. And for a very significant amount of my career, we were using like Bootstrap, for example.
Mm.
And then I was able to pivot into a position where I was able to lead development of a multi platform design system. And I'd become aware of design systems a little bit before that, had started being interested in them, had started being a little bit uh, less happy with Bootstrap, not because of anything they're doing wrong, but simply because I recognize that we need to meet needs that sticking strictly to the framework didn't address. And so I was kind of beginning to look into design systems. So I was able to pivot into a design system role and work on a somewhat greenfield design system. And um, in that process, and in the company that I was in, we were aiming for that design system to serve. It was an enterprise company. We had about 30 different brands that
Oh,
theoretically could, we wanted to serve them if it met their needs. And so in doing that, definitely started looking around more at different ways to ensure that they had, documentation or tooling or whatever they needed. But what I really found was that there was also, alongside of that, kind of some gaps in understanding both of CSS, but also semantics and these things where even if you have a developed design system, even if you make your best attempt at documenting it, there's still going to be scenarios where they need to customize it and they need to fit, bespoke user experience needs. And so, again, kind of alongside that, I recognized that, we have fantastic resources out there, CSS Tricks, Smashing Magazine, many others, similar in the industry that folks know to turn to. Um, but I wasn't seeing a whole lot of people. There are some people for sure, but not a whole lot of people addressing kind of making sure that folks that don't typically look at those things or don't really, they're after a specific problem that they have. And so I wanted to address both, like I said, getting them up to speed with what's available in CSS as a language, but also address, alongside that, kind of accidentally teaching them some other things like semantics and accessibility. And so you'll see that emphasized particularly in the modern CSS series.
That's great. That's great because um, this is something that we try to address in the field of design system at DeVriot with Backlight and with some kind of resources, But yeah, it's always complex to find the right way to teach people how to do things and the right things to do and how to do them. So yeah, we need a lot of resources. We need a lot of efforts for a lot of different kind of people because we
Mhm.
will have different kind of visions on how to implement things and sometimes we could have the right answer and sometimes not. It always the same thing with the web. It depends. So yeah,
Yes.
depending of the context, you may figure different kind of solutions and so on. I've got some questions for you, and my first one is there is a lot of CSS new things that are coming after years of stagnations where the standard doesn't evolve a lot. Then suddenly, right now, there's a lot of new features that are coming that could be great for working with design system. And we also saw that yesterday with the Apple conference with the last release of Safari that is coming with a lot of new features implemented in it. So like push notifications. So regarding specifically CSS, what are the most exciting features that you are looking for right now?
Yeah. So, in terms of yet to land, because there's some also recent ones that landed that I was excited about. Container queries is top of the list for me, particularly when it comes to design systems. Um, it's been a dream for a long time to not care so much about the viewport in terms of orchestrating changes when those changes should really happen on a component level. Um, and not only that, but um, the idea for a design system, a dream specifically in that realm, is to sort of write it once and ship anywhere. And again, that will help our components be so much more self contained, and address more needs, be able to anticipate needs, anticipate what contexts things will live in, and better prepare for those um, in ways that were definitely one of the stumbling blocks I ran against in my, my previous role in trying to develop this system where uh, that was one of the challenges of the documentation is like, well, you can drop this in, but take a form field, for example. You need to know other details about it. And so container queries, but also has is going to be a very helpful in this instance. Maybe we can detect, does the form have any fields with errors, and then use that as a tip off to show or hide an error message when previously we still needed to tap into JavaScript a lot of times to determine that. So if you folks haven't heard of has yet, it is the much longed for parent selector. um, where we can style based on like things like state of the children, classes they have, whether elements exist. But yeah, you've got the container queries proposal up here. Um, so yeah, container queries are going to feel very familiar if you have written media queries. It's a similar syntax. It has changed, and I know there's a very very recent change for the shorthand. I don't even know if it's reflected here yet. I just haven't looked.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Um, where you can do, yeah, as you're scrolling right there, you can, base it on just kind of size, quote
Mhm.
unquote, parameters, or you can also name your containers, which is going to be really powerful. So you
Yeah.
can be more specific, explicit about when changes should happen. It might not be necessarily based on the immediate parent, but you could um, have it tuned to a couple layers of parents or a couple ancestors prior. So yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. To me, it's one of the foundations of a concept that I'm trying to advocate a lot in the design system field, which is the shift left concept, where we are moving all the complexity into the design system. So the component itself is responsible of all that is happening inside the container by itself. And so this way you can easily, using container queries, just target the different kind of behaviors of your component depending on its parent, and not having to rely on your existing viewport and having to go through the whole hierarchy of your components and your applications and so on. So yeah, it's definitely really, really powerful.
Yes, and you mentioned the release of or the upcoming release of Safari 16, just as one browser that is they're all working on it.
Mhm.
Safari 16, I noticed in their release, announcement that they are specifically also going to include the style queries. So,
Oh yeah.
the original proposal, the available versions out there, and including the polyfill, that is currently available from Chrome Labs, it is you're gonna see mostly talk around size. That was kind of the priority everyone was working on. Style queries are gonna let us they're still within containers right now. You can even check the things such as a value of a custom property. So you can change styling of your container's children based on the value of a custom property, um, which and or you can change it based on the background color, whatever other property you want to check. That's what the style query does, um, which is just incredible. I can't even, it's one that is kind of difficult to fathom what opportunities that opens up by itself. So, or like, say, if you have, I think this would work. If you're using fluid typography, you could check is the font greater than 2 rem and do something based on that, for example. So just wildly powerful. I'm excited about that feature getting more incorporated with the other browsers as well. So
This is just totally insane. I can see that how you can use this feature and how powerful it is. Because right now what we are doing just with CSS custom properties is just awesome. So being able to target those custom properties with style queries, this is just incredible. And
yes,
yeah, and talking about CSS custom properties, it leads to my second question, which is, what's your most preferred way right now to distribute design tokens in a design system? Is there I don't know, a way that you prefer to share the different kind of values, or to get the values coming from design files? We've got a lot of different solutions available, but what's your most preferred?
yeah. So I have opinions that aren't fully tested, so that's my caveat. Um, I've been involved in doing it a few different ways. So that first role, tokens wasn't really something. since I was newer to design systems and I didn't really have a peer, tokens wasn't something we were fully aware of at that time. However, the method that I kind of inherited was um, JSS, which I don't even know if that still is is
Oh
in
yeah.
existence because I'm not doing React development anymore. I just did it for the 2 years on that role. Um, but what I enjoyed about that, that I've sort of carried through as part of my opinion is I like them living in JSON, as a flexible method to pass around. So, um, my current role, I came into an existing design system. The role has kind of morphed a little bit, so wasn't something where we were able to re-examine and redo how we did things and work in a token space. But it was built with less, so definitely a lot of reliance on variables. But in that frame, of course, it's all very tied to the system. And so, building off of the JSON idea, one of the things that I've done is I really think colors is a space where it makes a lot of sense to start with if you are newer to the tokens idea and to understand why they're useful for a workflow. So, for example, I released the Ally Color Tokens package to not only help you generate tokens, but also add an extra little layer of tooling, which is another reason I like the JSON format, is to have a middleware where it creates the um, contrast appropriate complementing color for each of your base color palette. Yep, there you go.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so just as a tool, it helps my own workflow. Not only does it generate tokens, but it also generates a markdown file that directly tells you which of your color pairs are compatible based on contrast. And so that's been useful to enable my own efficiency in my workflow of the projects that I do, where I can use this tool rather than run it through a bunch of other color contrast tools, um, and make sure that I'm meeting that requirement. So, um, yeah, I've kind of been focused a lot on the tooling side of it, or as a benefit of having things in tokens, and like I said, having it in JSON. So this package spits out custom properties ready to go, and if you are using Sass, it also creates a mixin for you to um, have your color tokens as well as variables available to you. So, uh, yeah, I like the transformative
Hmm.
ability there. Um, I tend to do a lot of, I haven't really formalized beyond that. I mostly see SaaS in use in my projects. And so I do currently usually have other tokens live there. Partly because I don't like to tokenize things like spacing. I like to use dynamic functions and units. So that's just another preference of mine personally. Um, I know that there's a design token spec, and I keep wanting to make time to go look at it because I definitely would like to get on board with that. I think it's pretty fascinating that that is going to be an actually specced out resource. So
Yeah. How did you went to this format for exporting the tokens and naming the tokens and so on? Because um, when I jumped in the project at the first time, I went through the documentation and I was okay. It reminds me a lot of Style Dictionary, the Style Dictionary format, and maybe what is coming with the design tokens format, with the actual current draft of the different kind of tokens, and so I was just, yes, a bit curious about, did you at first consider using the design token standard format? Will you want to be compatible with it? Is it just the tools that you are maintaining for your own needs and that is opinionated regarding your own needs? Or yeah, what's your do you have an opinion about this one?
yeah, so I've never worked with style dictionaries, so any tiny similarities are fairly coincidental, but I mean, it's pretty basic format. It's a name and then a value. So, you know, um, um, but yeah, in terms of the spec, I would like to once I get a minute to better understand that, I would like to release a new major version that possibly more corresponds to that. I have kind of the extra wrinkle in there where it's doing the color contrast part. So if if it kind of allows for, I don't know, ad hoc, features that you need for a token, um, that would be ideal. So I just haven't been able to have time to look into it. But you're also correct that it was built initially for my own needs, like I said, to improve just my efficiency in my own projects. But um, seems like folks are using it and finding value in it. Um, and so I definitely would not want to, you know, now it's the open source, responsibility, right? Where you don't want to break break things for folks. So but I think I'll look into it, and if it, still matches the intent and seems reasonable, um, maybe a major version that would actually conform to that spec. So we'll see.
Yeah, totally. And talking about open source, if some of you folks are curious about it, and as I am, maybe you can write, or maybe it exists. I don't know. You will tell me. I'm curious about a Vite plugin dedicated to your tool, so it could be easy integrated into a Vite powered stack, something like that. My idea behind that is that um, at Backlight, we are for Backlight, we're using Vite behind the hood to generate and pre-render some kind of files and so on. And so I was talking with the rest of the engineering team about your tool, and I was asking, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have it and say, okay, you know what, do a Vite plugin for it, and it would be really easy to plug into Backlight. So if there is a Vite plugin, otherwise I will write one, and so we will be able to support it directly into Backlight. That would be nice. I would be happy for that. And but yeah, definitely. This is, as you said, the power of open source to grab the project and fork it, use it, and so on. So do you have a lot of contribution on this project, or are you working really alone on it, or
Yeah, it's just my own. I don't even think I've had very many issues, which, you know, pros and cons of that. I've asked for feedback, so I absolutely would appreciate feedback if folks pick it up. Because again, outside of just my own little small open source projects, I mean, it seems to get downloads. It has, you know, a decent amount of stars and all that jazz,
Hmm.
but that's not really a measure of, what are folks getting out of it, what they need, and things like that for sure. So
Yeah, okay. Um, there is another feature that I'm really looking for in CSS regarding the design system things. The add layer rule dedicated to organize different kind of styles into different kind of layers to override at some point the specificity. So um, do you have any kind of opinion about this one? Are you excited to use it, or did you already tried it? Because the support is now um, pretty much good. So yeah, I'm curious about your opinion on this one.
yeah, I'm going to add. I was able to write about this a few months ago. Wow, I guess January already, for Smashing Magazine. And so, really did a deep dive at that time to try to understand it because it does take a little more time, I think, to understand than maybe container queries, for example. But the idea of layers is that we can separate out um, and better control and orchestrate the specificity of our styles. And so, whereas, um, previously we just sort of had the regular cascade, and basically that's why folks have invented the frameworks and tooling and all these things is basically to battle the cascade. Um, based on different constraints or simply misunderstanding the cascade. I'm a big fan of the cascade. I have a silly joke T-shirt that I sell, quote unquote, sell, called "Become One with the Cascade." So I'm very pro moving, using it to your advantage and cascade layers. Um, so Miriam Suzanne is the spec writer on this, and uh, has kind of joked like this will force people to actually learn the cascade, even at the same time that it's a tool to better control it. Um, because what you're doing is you're able to divide your styles into layers, and then you're able to very explicitly define the order of those layers. And the last layer wins, to put it very, very, very simply. You can still introduce important, that gets a little confusing. I recommend you can check out this article. There's other resources to check out, but basically,
Yeah.
important flips the order of specificity, which is confusing. I can't really mouth explain this. It needs a visual. I might actually have a graph on here. Actually, now that I think about it, but anyway, so you're able to have like a utilities layer and a reset layer, and then a components layer. Um, what can get a little bit of a gotcha if you're first starting to check it out, probably two things. So if you have like a um, or a component layer where you kind of have laid out typography styles, for example, and are styling using a simple element selector, um, the or you're excuse me, you're styling like a card, like a class card paragraph. So you have the extra specificity in normal specificity rules of the class. But if you have another layer that comes later, or if you have styles that are not in a layer, those unlayered styles take precedence over everything. And so whether it's a later layer, this is confusing, layer that you define uh, later in your cascade, or if you have styles outside of a layer and you're simply using the P element selector, that's going to override the card P selector, which a little bit of a gotcha. It's very intentional. It's supposed to be that way. Um, but again, it'll make us really examine and actually write our styles, I think, more carefully. But there is advantages, um, especially if you are in a scenario where you are, in an enterprise sort of scenario where you're being required to include widgets from third party tools. Layers will allow you to essentially downgrade the specificity of those widget styles.
Mm.
And in that case, being able to override them, if it's bringing in some sort of content, um, and you're able to override it with your more simplistic, what seems like lower specificity rules, um, then that's actually very, very powerful. So it's putting the control of your CSS back in the hands of you as the author, um, in a lot of ways here. So, um, yeah, hugely powerful. Takes a little while to wrap your mind around, um, but I'm excited to have it more fully implemented and have it available as a tool. Which I kind of the just thing to be aware of there is browsers are working on it. Um, I've heard that there's a polyfill in progress, but it's very, very tricky to
Mhm.
polyfill because it's all about specificity.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think this one, unfortunately, will probably take a few years before we can confidently use it as the primary way that we're writing our styles. So
Mm.
that's one of the reasons that they determined that unlayered styles would take precedence. So basically, the way that you're already writing CSS today, it will always have this highest specificity. Once you start including layers, um, those will create kind of a new ranking of specificity, but they'll always be beat out by styles outside of a layer.
Mhm.
So, new rules to learn, new best practices yet to be developed. I'm sure we'll see more frameworks and tooling and current frameworks and tooling adapt to this when it's finally stable, um, to create methods that take advantage of layers. So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely this kind of things takes time to be widely adopted, and Daniel Glassman, whom was the co-chairman of the CSS working group for years, often told me that we are the only industry that support backward compatibility over 30 years, because what you write, what you wrote in the past, that worked in the previous browsers in the 90s still works today. So we have to maintain this compatibility, and maintaining this compatibility is really hard. So especially for the vendors behind the browsers. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's really exciting to have those kind of new features available. So yeah. When we prepared this session, you told me about 3 ways to make a component, and I'm really curious about this one. So maybe we could just going a bit into coding, and you can just show me or explain me the 3 ways you are thinking of. So so
Yes.
for the
So,
context, this is
uh,
Backlight. So this is our design system editor we are working on. So maybe we can try to build them with it, and you told me what you have in mind, and let's try to implement them.
so one caveat, I'm not they're specifically in terms of in 11D and using the templating language Nunjucks. So I don't know if
Seems
that's
perfect for me. So because
all right.
you know what, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Nunjucks. So I made a starter kit for Backlight dedicated to Nunjucks. So we're able to use Nunjucks to build different kind of components directly. Um,
Perfect.
so yeah, let's make a test. Let's say version 1, and let's try to craft a new component. You tell me what you have in mind.
Let's do a super basic card, not necessarily worrying about styling, just the semantics of a super basic card. Um, so if we want to start with the HTML first, and then
Mhm.
we'll kind of move that around to fit the 3 different ways to do this.
Okay. So tell me just a simple car.html file, something like
Yeah,
this. Okay, perfect.
for now.
Fine.
Um, so we can just do a div wrapper just for this quick example
Mhm.
with a class of card if you'd like.
Okay.
And then let's just 3 simple elements. Let's have a um, start it out with an image.
Okay.
I don't know if you have a quick placeholder you like to use.
Oh, what's your preferred one? I use the one which was what was the name? Lorem image something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to use Place Corgi, but they don't keep an SSL,
Oh,
so it load in
I
some
love this
fields.
name. Place Corgi. What that? Okay, I love it. You've got one. That's it. You've got a corgi. That's it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep, I do. Nice.
Okay, so let's try to see what we could have with this one. So just a simple image. Okay.
And then just let's just do an H3 for now and a paragraph, with some lorem or whatnot, just as
Perfect.
placeholders in here.
Yeah. Let me get some lorem somewhere.
I like to use Cupcake Ipsum personally.
You have a lot of resources that I love. Cupcake keep some. Let's do this. Oh, that's perfect. Let me show you. Awesome. So one paragraph.
Perfect.
That's
And
great.
you could do
And we
probably
could
half that
copy.
or a third of that.
Yeah.
It's pretty long.
Okay, let's go for a short one.
There you go.
Okay. And here we go. So, all right. So is my doc loading or not? Yes.
Beautiful.
Okay. Fantastic.
Very, very fantastic corgi as well. You could just stick a headline in there just so we kind of have a few different if you want to stick it above between those two.
Okay.
So after the image, yeah. Just an H3 probably.
Just a link, you say, okay?
Or a headline, like an H3, I
Oh,
think.
yeah. Okay, something like this?
Yeah.
Okay. let's say something. Fine.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just briefly explain the 3 different ways that, again, in an 11D context, I'm not sure if they all transfer to just nunchucks, so we might have to let me know. So at least in 11D, kind of the baseline way is to um, set up some variables in here that we'll replace out, and then be able to include it as a partial. I think that's core
Mhm.
functionality. And that's kind of the really super baseline way. So, for example, you know, that lovely content we just put in, you know, standard stuff, right? Your H3, that content becomes maybe like a title, and the paragraph becomes content.
Mhm.
What I like about Nunjucks, though, is um, I like that it continues to look like HTML. But we can use those templating features in Nunjucks so we can, wrap some nice if checks around there so we don't render an empty element and things like that. Um, we'd put one up for our image source and then we'd have one for the alt as well. So just to basically figuring out which things make sense as properties or variables, whichever your
Mhm.
whichever term you kind of prefer. So I don't up to you if you wanna kind of
Let me,
quickly make some of those swaps, I guess.
okay, so making a new file to be ready to import the cards, that's it?
Sure, yeah, so
Yeah,
you can do
okay.
a card.njk.
Okay, let's do something like this.
Sure. We can
Okay,
copy in our HTML, and then we can swap out for the variables.
okay, let's do something like this. And let me just put this one in another folder so it won't. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So, like, our image source, let's just swap that out, just kinda go down the line there. We'll do it really simple, since I know we're don't have too much more time either. So if you take out that existing image source and do let's just create a placeholder for a variable of src. I think just as the value. We'll leave the
Yeah,
attribute.
we could do something like this. And
Yeah,
let me
the double
something.
curly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect. And let's say SSEMG, something like this.
sure. And then do similar for that title content and the paragraph content. I would just say title and then maybe just content for the other one.
Okay, let's do this. Okay.
Yeah. So then if we have another file where we want to place this,
Hmm.
um, just index or whatever, whatever makes the most sense in your system
Perfect.
there.
Yeah.
So, are you familiar with the includes for
Yep.
Nunjucks?
Let's do
Yep. So we
this.
can just include our card. And so one thing about including it as a partial. At first, this made the most sense to me, but it's definitely allows us to componentize things. It allows us technically to create things as repeatable,
Hmm.
but it doesn't. I don't know if encapsulates quite the right word here, but it doesn't encapsulate the properties that you're going to pass in. So yeah, I'll let you do the include. And the way that we pass properties in, so that we can actually replace those variables that we set up. Sorry, I'm using this term interchangeably. I'm not sure which is actually correct for nunchucks. I'm sure some folks are familiar with like React and properties is familiar.
I guess, yeah. I guess property is the right
Yeah.
way to name them.
So if you scoot that line down a little bit, we've got to define our properties prior to that include. So if you, yeah, make a new line and we use the set
Yes.
feature. Yeah, there you go. So we can set, yep, our title and pass that in.
Yeah, I guess it's a string, so I have to use the quotes if I remind correctly.
Yes.
Okay, let's get the same one.
Here we go. And then you would just
Perfect.
repeat that set, yep, for each of those that you want to pass in. And then we'll kind of explore what the downside of a partial is after you get this initial group in here. And then our image source, I think, was the last thing.
Yeah, it's something like this. Okay. And this one. Okay, EMGSSE. Yes, because this is not the right one. So, am I right on that? Oh, yeah, I know. I kept. Is it this one? Maybe not.
Let's see.
What is
Might
it?
just be a little pokey and loading from that service.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. It's probably on my side, but yeah, let me find. Yeah. Let me reload just to be sure. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you tell me.
Yeah. So if you just copy, like, just do
Yeah,
a duplicate of
just
that.
duplicate this one. Okay.
There you go. What's going to happen is it's going to inherit all those properties you set. So if you want to change them, you have to fully reset them. Like you could just set the title, but that would mean that your content and image stays the same. Now, sometimes this is preferable. I use this method on modern CSS in the articles
Yeah.
when I am building up a demo. So it's a really nice feature because I can set my HTML for the demo once at the top
Mm-hmm.
and then only change like the CSS variable to update the demo. So it's
Hmm.
really nice in that context. But for truly reusability and not having that feature, which is probably more often desirable if you're talking about building components in the system, we have kind of two options. Um, well, at least in 11D we do. So one of them is macros, which I know is a Nunjucks feature.
Yeah.
And this one's probably going to feel the most familiar if you have done like React components or,
Mm-hmm.
Vue or Angular or whatnot. It's going to feel a little friendlier to write, I guess. So with this one, if you want to just copy our card.njk,
Yeah.
and we can rename it like card.macro.njk, just like as a convention. Um,
Mm.
it's not a required name to turn something into a macro, but
Okay.
yeah. And so for our macro, we can leave what we already have, but at the top, we need to put a wrapper around it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so we can
To
call it
define a new
macro,
macro. Okay. Let's
and
name
then we'll
it
call it
card.
card. Yep. And we can either, so just my brain is on a little bit of JavaScript terms, but essentially destructure out of the properties, or we can just generically have a props, that we have in there, and then we'll just basically treat our properties as we can get those with
Like a JSON
object
object. Yeah.
notation. Yeah.
Mhm.
Dot notation. Yeah.
Perfect.
So either way.
So it's gonna be something like this, I guess.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the one caveat with macros then is not really caveat, but just a difference is we do still include them. We have a little bit different way to include them. Um, but unfortunately, that means that you have to include them on every page that you want to use them, which again may not actually feel like a barrier if you're used to building up things in a JavaScript
Mm-hmm.
framework. Which for folks that are on the stream, by the way, Nunjucks is strictly a static templating language. We are not loading any JavaScript to do this. This doesn't end up creating a client side JavaScript bundle. Um, so just an important clarification on what we're doing here. Um, so yeah, if you want to take out that second include just so we can kind of show the difference.
Okay. So something like cal.macro. Is it?
Yeah, so a
Yeah.
macro is a little bit different, and I'm getting to my reference because I always forget how to put this in correctly. One
um,
second. I had it open and then I closed it. Um, so instead of include, you'll say
it's
from,
include. Is it include from?
just from.
Oh yeah, it's
It's
from.
a
Yeah.
different syntax. Yeah,
Yeah.
from,
That's it.
and then you'll say import. and then the name of our macro. What's kind of interesting about a macro is you could have several components in
Mhm.
there and then selectively import which ones you actually expect to use on the page.
Right.
So now it's going to look a little bit to actually include it. Yep, it looks a little bit more like including a variable. Yep,
Mhm.
exactly. Um, yep. So you have the
And do we
parentheses
pass, yeah,
and your
and the
curlies.
curlies,
Yep.
yeah. Okay.
So it feels a lot more like defining props. Truly.
Yeah.
What's kind of interesting though, now that we know how to use set, is if you do have more complex content, like say that for that content block, we wanted to include other formatting like bolding or a link or something, and it might feel kind of messy depending on how much content to put it in that property. You can still use that set idea, and whereas for our include, we use set to kind of just define a one liner. You can use set as a kind of a block as well. So you can say,
Okay. So I could do something
yeah,
like this. Let's say
set, and you'll just
card
want to make it,
props.
yeah, yeah, or card content because it'll just be to for this one instance. So sorry, I wasn't very clear.
It's
If
probably
you
me.
want to leave the other properties that you had defined,
Okay.
we're just going to pretend that we want more, have our content specifically be a little more expanded. So you can take out the equals actually. So instead of defining it one line, we'll define it as a block. So if you make a new line after there,
Mhm.
after the set, you'll close it off with
And the handset.
inset. Yep.
Okay.
So instead, inside of there, we can do, our lorem, but you could add in, a link or something else, something that would make it a little more
Mhm,
complex
mhm, mhm.
formatting.
Let's say, okay, let's say we're gonna take um another paragraph with a link inside or something like this.
Yeah. And again,
Uh,
you can continue to do this inline, but to me, if it's a little more complex content or longer content, it's nice to have the option to kind of pull it out on its own.
mhm. Let's do just something like this
Yeah. Yeah.
for the sake of the demo. Okay.
So instead, yep, you would swap and pass that card content in as your value there. Yeah.
Okay. And we've got
So I think,
it. But
yeah. So
an
I think
escape.
we need to go back to the macro file
Hmm.
and um, you'll pass in the filter of safe.
Yeah. Okay.
And that will basically
So
say we can render whatever HTML we find, hopefully. Maybe it's
mhm.
different for based on jugs. Like I said, I'm used to working in the 11D context, so maybe there's
Yeah,
a
no,
different.
maybe there's different. I'm not that sure. I guess that's a safe, or is it? Let me check quickly because it's supposed to be okay. So yeah. Mhm. Let me just reload the render. Sometimes fix things. Yeah, that
There
was
you
it.
go.
That
Okay,
was it. Okay.
cool. So that's our second option. Like I said, I think it's probably I would suggest it if you're working in Nunjucks for building components. The last one may be just 11D specific where you can build a short code. So I
Okay.
think that,
So yeah, for this one, maybe I won't be able to do it in Backlight,
yeah,
but yeah, tell
I'll
me,
just
tell
kind of
me.
explain though
Yeah,
that
yeah,
for the short code, actually I can give you a link to pull up.
yeah.
So we built out these different versions. I went over them in my stream a few weeks ago,
Hmm.
um, where um, we were building up this card and um, we reviewed these three different kinds. So the short code, if you prefer to write in a more JavaScript syntax, if you rather do it that way. I put that in the chat there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, but a short
Perfect.
code, you're doing that. You can do it in your config. There's ways to separate that, but I won't go on that tangent. But then you're treating it more, I mean, it is JavaScript you can see we've got our template literal basically. And I think it feels a little bit heavier depending on how complex your component is. Because you're using just really standard JavaScript features. You don't
Mhm.
have all the extra helpers and syntax methods to manage props and whatnot, as from a real framework. But if it's the benefit of a short code over macros, if you are using 11D, is that it is already globally available. You don't have to separately include it or import it. So that's your kind of consideration for using a short code over a macro. So,
Okay, it's interesting because in the context of a design system, you could be able to distribute those kind of shortcodes to your teammates, not only for components but maybe for small kinds of elements that you want to reuse or repeat a lot in your different kind of interfaces. Um, so yeah, that's a. Is there how do you finally get which one to use depending on the context, which one you prefer in some context, or do you have a favorite one, or it totally depends of what you are building?
I think it depends. What I like about each of these, though, even this last one here, is um, we're focusing on the semantics first,
Mhm.
and then we're just, layering in the props. So whatever method you need to layer on props, I think it's fairly reasonable in whichever method to pretty quickly convert it to, if you do need a different style or if you even need to pull it out and go ahead and add in a framework. You've at least done the work of the semantics and you've done the work of probably styling at this point as well. Um, and, so you're still giving yourself a leg up, even if you kind of switch formats. Um, the like I said, it depends on kind of the globally or, one-off includes that you need to have. Um, a little bit it depends on how you prefer to pass in those props. Because again, with that includes, they're kind of being a little bit more globally defined, at least per page instance, which can be a hindrance. So I would say probably for that reason, in most cases, I would either go with macro or short code. Um, Again, in a strictly 11 context, there is a way to kind of load up your macros in your layout. So, in other words, kind of there's a way around being
Mhm.
able to offer them and make them feel more global. And because we're not, when we say that we're importing it or including it, we are not, you know, that just matters at build time.
Mhm.
The client isn't paying a cost for that. We're not like building, a massive JavaScript bundle. So it takes a little mind shift as well when you are working on a static
Yeah.
platform. So
Yeah, what's it also interesting? What it demonstrates is that you don't have to work on a complex web app or a complex system to use a design system. If you are
mhm,
just working on your very own website, just for your own needs, you could also build your very own design system and use it after that to build your own
yeah,
website, and a simple static templating language like Nunjucks would be perfectly enough. And yeah, so that's really interesting, and it's something that I really value. To be perfectly honest, I started this Nunjucks starter kits for Backlight for exactly that, because I wanted to rebuild my website, and I said, okay, I need a design system, but I want to do it with 11T and Nunjucks. I don't want to use React or Vue or a complex JavaScript framework. I just want simple templating syntax. So having just the support of Nunjucks and being able to, write some macros to define the components and reuse them, it was really the right way to do it with a simple website. So yeah,
yes.
that's really great. Um, we are running a bit out of time, so is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up the session?
Well, if I may, I would like to mention I have a workshop coming up in a month that I would love to see you in. We do use Levity as the foundation for that. Don't need any Levity knowledge. The main focus of the workshop is for leveling up with CSS. It's called Level Up with Modern CSS. It's in partnership with Smashing Conferences. And I would love to see you there. There's still, I think, a few early bird tickets left. And we also have 4 scholarships available for underrepresented folks in tech. So you can fill out a little form if you'd like to apply for that as well.
Awesome. So let me just put it on screen, I guess. It's this one, I guess so, yeah?
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. We're gonna put the link on the chat and the videos. So thank you very much again for being with me today. It was really great to have you, and really insightful about the different kind of way to build components in a context of a design system that are not using a complex JavaScript framework and so on. So yeah, thank you very much for that. That's the end of the session for today, folks. In 4 minutes, it's gonna be Learn with Jason with Thijs, our lead designer at Div Riot. That's gonna talk about stories to design, which is another product at Div Riot. So let's get there and have a look at it. And thank you again for being with me. And see you next week, everyone, with a new episode dedicated to multi-brand in a design system with Yana Kelris. Bye bye, and see you hopefully next time.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Bye.